Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Appreciate all of you being here, both the folks that are here in person and those online. I think we're up and recording, and it's great to see you all. So on a beautiful fall day after some precip. Yeah. All right. Just a few thanks as we get started. I wanted to thank Marissa Weinberg, who's now sitting in a different place, for all her help putting the agenda together, and just really, Marissa, thanks for all your work over the years. She's just been tremendous to work with. I wanted to thank Jim Harris for doing the minutes. So, all right, I'll declare we've got a quorum present. I'm pretty sure we do. And then we normally do introductions, so we'll maybe, Brad, if we can start with you. We'll go around and we'll introduce the representatives and liaisons that are sitting around the table, and we'll go out to the audience. We won't do online just because I've never found an efficient way to do that. So, Brad.
Brad Perry, Vice Chair for the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, Tribal Liaison.
I'm Tyler Smith. I'm with the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. I'm the Installation Resiliency Program Manager. So I function as the Military Installation Liaison.
Randy Elliott, Davis County Commissioner.
Good morning, Jessica Wade, Field Manager for Salt Lake Field Office, Bureau of Land Management.
Ben Abbott from BYU and the liaison from the Utah Lake Watershed Council.
Waylon Myers with the sewer folks.
Ann Neville, standing in for Elizabeth Kitchen, Nature Conservancy.
Tim Hawks, I'm with Aquaculture.
Tom Ward, representing municipalities.
Trevor Nelson with the Bearer Watershed Council, liaison member.
Dina Blaze with Salt Lake County.
Joe Havasey, Mineral Extraction Industry.
Okay, thanks, everyone. We'll come out here, and I'm just going to hand this. You're going to hand this over to Marcel.
Thanks. Marcel Shoup with National Audubon Society and Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust.
Max Malmquist, National Audubon Society and the Trust.
Linda Freitas, Friends of Great Salt Lake.
R. Jeffrey Hicks, Utah Airboat Association.
Scott and Sandy Young, we live in Bear River, Wyoming.
Ben Starman, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Jim Harris, Division of Water Quality.
John Urey with Water for the West.
Chandler Rosenberg with Stewardship Utah.
Jan Streifel, League of Women Voters.
Mark Reynolds, U.S. Magnesium.
Trip Armstrong, National Audubon Society and the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust.
Dan Strauch with the Utah Audubon Council.
Marissa Weinberg, Great Salt Lake Sentinel Landscape.
Randy Thomaser with Carollo Engineers.
Monica Hoyt with Carollo Engineers.
Micah Safeston, Great Salt Lake Water Coordinator with the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office.
Hey, Candace Hassnager with the Director of the Division of Water Resources.
Carly Payne, Division of Water Resources.
Laura Vernon, Water Resources.
David O'Leary, Director of the USGS Utah Water Science Center.
Jamie Barnes, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Brian Steeves, Great Salt Lake Commissioner.
Fancy that, the commissioner's hiding in the corner. So, it's funny, as we were just going around doing introductions, I found myself getting just a little bit emotional, which is really strange when people are doing introductions of all things. Maybe I'm just getting older and more emotional, but what has defined efforts to protect and preserve Great Salt Lake has always been community. And so I just wanted to say thanks for being part of that community and part of that discussion. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to say we have sitting in for Elizabeth Kitchen and Neville, who is retiring this month, as I understand. Is that right, Anne? So I wanted to recognize her. She's worked on land and water issues in Great Salt Lake for an awfully long time. And Ann, we wanted to say thank you so much for all you've done, and I hope you can join me in giving a round of applause for Ann. Okay, so council members, you should have received a copy of the agenda in advance and hopefully had a chance to review that. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Councilmember, so moved, Dina, and the second, Tom. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. You also should have received a copy of the meeting minutes from our September 11th meeting. I haven't seen any changes or amendments to those minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, Leland.
Second.
Second, Tom. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries, and the minutes are approved. Thanks so much. So one of the things we've done, it's fairly recent, is really try to expand the conversation and the community really, and bring in. We have a watershed council framework here in the state where different watersheds have got together and organized in councils to communicate on water issues. And there are several watersheds that are constituent to Great Salt Lake. And so one of the things we've done is to invite new liaisons, if you will, from those watersheds and from different interest groups, many of whom introduced themselves this morning, to come and participate in this dialogue and discussion. And one of the things we've been wanting to do is with those groups or those interests that have been recently invited to come and participate in Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, we've just been doing a little bit of a round robin to have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit more about the perspective and the interests that they represent. So we have two of them here today that have graciously agreed to give us a little more in-depth introduction. We're going to start with Trevor Nielsen with the Bear River Canal Company. And Trevor, thanks for being here and for being willing to present. So we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, just a sec here to see. We're going to share a window.
Do you get okay, you got it there.
Oh, great. See, I think I need to share a different way. Someone guide me here on the best way to do this. Let's see, do I share the window or the entire screen? Okay. Window. Okay, so it's not kicking over to the presentation, it's just showing the slides. Okay.
Oh, it disappeared.
There we go.
All right, I think we're there.
Okay, so my name is Trevor Nelson, as was mentioned. I'm the general manager of the Bear River Canal Company, and I'm a member of the Bear River Watershed Council. And I was selected by my peers to represent the council on the Great Salt Lake Watershed and invited to be a liaison member on the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. So we really appreciate the opportunity to come and share today. So the Bear...
Hey, Trevor, can I get you to just move a little closer to that mic? Just for the online folks.
Is that a little better? Okay. So the Bear is split into three different divisions, upper, central, and lower division. So it starts in the Uinta Mountains in northeastern Utah, comes down, drops into Wyoming, and just after Woodruff Narrows Reservoir crosses back into Utah and services the east side of Rich County. Working further downstream, you get into just before Pixley Dam, you go back into Wyoming, and coming down through Wyoming, you cross into Idaho, and before reaching Stewart Dam, the entire Bear is diverted at Stewart Dam and either goes into, well, it goes into Mud Lake and either goes into the Bear Lake, depending on the time of year and irrigation demands downstream, or it gets routed through Bear Lake and back to Bear River and continues on down. As you move past Montpelier, you head down to the Soda area and Grace area. And at that point, you start to pick up with a lot of the larger irrigators as well as the hydroelectric projects. So you have Soda, Grace, Oneida, and Cutler are the 4 large Pacific Corp-run hydroelectric facilities on the Bear. And as you move down through these valleys there in Grace, you pick up Last Chance Canal Company, West Cache, Cub River, the small irrigators in Idaho and Utah, and move down. And finally at Cutler is the point of diversion for Bear River Canal Company, which is the largest irrigation company in the state of Utah and in the Bear River Basin. After you get through, well, as you come south of Preston, you enter into Cache Valley, and a lot of people don't realize that the Bear doubles in size when you get to Cache Valley. So that's the reason why there's somewhat of a limitation of Bear River water that can be stored in Bear Lake, is because hydrologically, those tributaries are what feed the Bear, and most of the water that actually makes it to the Great Salt Lake is coming out of Cache Valley and those tributary streams, because there's no reservoir to catch it. Anyways, you keep moving down past Cutler, and the Malad River is picked up there that comes out of Idaho. And you work your way down to the very end where you have the Migratory Bird Refuge, the Bear River Club, and the Chesapeake Club, some really large environmental interests there. And the Migratory Bird Refuge is actually the largest bird refuge in the western United States. Then the river works its way down after crossing through the refuge into the Great Salt Lake itself. So one of the important things on the Bear is the decrees of the different rivers. Each river's decree is important, but I wanted to point out 2 that are really important: the Kimball Decree and the Dietrich Decree. It's actually the same decree, one in Idaho and one in Utah, that match each other exactly. And that's the first time that they start talking about responsibilities from one state to another as far as water deliveries, because it's Bear Lake water that was being taken by upstream users before it got to Utah to service Bear River Canal Company. That action is kind of what started or spurred on the interstate compact that exists between Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. So of the tributary streams to the Great Salt Lake, the Bear has the distinction of being a compact stream. And in some ways, it's very helpful because you have to convince your neighbors that something's the right thing to do, because they each, it's a majority, or it's a, everyone has to agree or you don't get anything done in a compact. But it also creates some challenges. Just like the Colorado River, there are allocations that are still left to the 3 states that are unfulfilled at this point in time. And so that's a real challenge for the Great Salt Lake. And the sister states aren't necessarily as concerned as we are in Utah about the Great Salt Lake. So that's something that we work to inform them on, and to keep, the findings of this council, keep them apprised of that. The other thing that's a big player in the Bear is the Bear Lake Settlement Agreement. So there's about 500,000 acres of farm ground in the Bear River Basin. That includes all 3 states. And about a quarter of that is serviced from irrigation contracts from Utah Power, or from Rocky Mountain Power now, and Pacific Corp. And this agreement is an agreement between Pacific Corp, the irrigators, which are now collectively known as the Bear River Water Users Association, and the environmental interests known as now Bear Lake Watch, in how to manage Bear Lake in a way that was sustainable. It's really quite a success in the ability for industry and the environment to coexist. And although I think everyone came out of that maybe not happy, they had something they can live with, and it created surety for all involved. And it's created some strong relationships that are unique on the Bear, where you have environmental interests, heavy industry, and agriculture all on the same page. One of the unique things I wanted to mention about the Bear is it's mostly privately developed as far as how the water itself was developed. There's only 2 reclamation projects, Hiram Dam and Newton Dam. The remainder, I believe, are private pioneer type dams. Some of the larger ones include, as we mentioned, Bear Lake, which holds the distinction as reservoir number 1, which when Powell did his initial survey of where good reservoirs could be placed by what is now reclamation, Bear Lake was the first site that he scouted out, and Telluride Power eventually developed that, and it's the system it is today. But Woodruff Narrows is another large one, Porcupine Reservoir, and there's a number of other off main channel reservoirs that are quite sizable, such as Strong Arm. There's several Strong Arm reservoirs and Twin Lakes irrigation, as well as some in the Preston area. So as I mentioned, agriculture is the biggest use of water in our basin. And you can see here, this on the left shows the type of irrigation that we use, and on the right is the crops that are grown. So, you know, from the very low value crops such as wheat all the way up to the high value crops of onions and mint that can gross $30,000 an acre. A lot of my graphics are taken from a recent study done last year that was headed by the Cache Water District, and they went through and did an evaluation of essentially what the Bear River's water provides. And here's some of those values. You can see agriculture out in front with just over 850 million, followed by the mineral extraction industry, working your way on down to the Bear. In totality, they estimated to be about $1.5 billion of input to the economy of Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming annually. So our basin is also known for being very progressive, particularly advancing these pioneer era systems. And so although these are pictures of Bear River Canal Company, they are typical of what's happening around the basin. So you can see there at the top left, native canal that's being on the top right piped, and that's what it looks like before and after. And then you can see them installing the boxes and putting pipelines in. There's several really large PL 566 projects. So there on the left is one that Bear River Canal Company is looking at to the tune of $30 to $50 million, and abandoning one of our less stable canals. And you know, we not only are doing piping, but also liner projects. This is a liner project, actually one of the first ag optimization projects that was done in 2020, excuse me. And then also replacing some things like pioneer era flumes there on the bottom left with new box culvert type structures. We also are not alone in our basin at looking at automation. The automation site on your left there is splitting 735 CFS, and we have the granularity of being able to split that plus or minus about 3 CFS. It's amazingly accurate. But then a more typical site on the right there. And we're taking this old infrastructure and retrofitting it to have this new technology put into it, preparing for future generations. There's my little boy and me at that same location just before we installed the gates. So, but you can see we leave some of that pioneer era infrastructure in place. This is another site. And you know, it gives us measurement and control, and we're seeing savings approaching the 10,000 acre foot mark annually. Takes a lot of work to do these though. Retrofits are not easy. And working around water is difficult because of the subterranean water you have to work with, as you can see on the picture on the right there. But as I said, we're seeing excellent results, updating these structures from left to right and moving forward. But we're not alone. Our producers are also making great strides in innovation as well. This is a system that's been developed by Clay Carter, an engineer who's also a farmer in our system. This is the surge flood irrigation system that he's developed. And this is among a number of innovations that have happened. We're not unique in that. At Bear River Canal Company, our sister companies have done some great things, particularly West Cache and Cub River, to other large irrigation companies, as well as the irrigation companies in Cache Valley coming out of the Logan River are doing some large projects to pipe. And so, you know, we're moving forward and advancing as a basin. This is a picture of the Cutler facility, and they're actually looking at doing a pump back storage project at this location. And so lots of interesting things happening in the Bear, and you know, it's a more complex system than I think people appreciate because of its interstate connectedness, as well as the fact that Pacific Corp's very involved with the delivery of water on the Bear. So are there any questions about the Bear? I mean, that was the very much the Reader's Digest version, but anyways.
Great presentation, Trevor. Thank you. Any quick questions for Trevor? Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, Trevor. You know, one of my favorite illustrations of Great Salt Lake is kind of shaped a little bit like a heart, and it has these kind of artery-looking things coming in. Far and away, the biggest and most important artery is the Bear River. So appreciate you being here, Trevor, and engaging. And that's it's really, really key for Great Salt Lake's future to understand the Bear and its contributions. Okay, the second liaison we've asked to present is Ben Abbott, representing the Utah Lake Watershed Council. And Ben, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I don't have any visuals today because my voice is just so engaging. I knew that's what you wanted to listen to. But a little bit of background on the Utah Lake Watershed. So we are smaller than the Bear, but I've got to challenge Trevor on one point, because Utah Lake is Utah's first artificial reservoir before the Bear River. So if Bear River is reservoir 1, then Utah Lake is reservoir 0. So a little bit of friendly lake competition there. The main rivers flowing into Utah Lake are the Provo, Spanish Fork, and Hobble Creek rivers. And then interestingly, there's water that's imported from Strawberry Reservoir in the Colorado Basin, and then also water from the Weber River that's brought into the Provo. So very complex. The watershed is a part of the Central Utah Project, which is itself a really interesting story, right? The largest federal water project ever proposed and funded, which thankfully was scaled back by about 96%. If we look at the number of acre feet it was intended to move initially, realizations of water limitation scaled that back, and we've been focused on conservation ever since. The Utah Lake Watershed Council has been focused over the last year on meeting with different stakeholders, gathering information, and then building relationships among the different sectors that are represented. So we have representation from agriculture, industry, municipalities, and then I'm the sole kind of research academic person on the council. We've had a series of field trips, including meeting with the people leading the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, visiting different dams and reservoirs throughout the watershed, and working with Utah Lake Authority. I wanted to focus on kind of some of the controversies that have come up in the Watershed Council, starting with kind of a question of what purpose are we serving? So there's been a question of how do we plug in a useful way that's not redundant to existing water management. And that's an open discussion. We're kind of in the vision values planning part of that. There also has been a discussion that I think is pertinent to the advisory council about how Great Salt Lake should be prioritized relative to other demands of water. And I and many others are, of course, advocating for Great Salt Lake as an important use and investment of water, but there absolutely still are frequent comments made and questions raised about, okay, does it make sense to be conserving for what ultimately is just a salty body of water? Now, everybody here understands that's not the case. I just wanted to report that back as a group a little bit farther away from Great Salt Lake where those discussions are still occurring. And then there is an ongoing discussion about kind of the 3 approaches to increasing water security: conservation, water augmentation, and then ecosystem engineering. So on the conservation side, we met and discussed with Provo their enhanced groundwater recharge program right now, which is interesting from a technical perspective. I think from a water security perspective, it's not necessarily a helpful project because it allows Provo to consume more of their water rights that previously were flowing into Utah Lake and Great Salt Lake. So there are lots of technical things we can do to potentially augment supply or increase consumption or water available for human development that aren't helpful to the lake. And then there have been continued discussions about modifying Utah Lake and even modifying Great Salt Lake from an ecosystem engineering perspective to reduce evaporation, which is, of course, a really important part of the ecology of these systems, serves a bunch of different purposes. But there are those who are drawn toward that. So, for example, about 50% of the water that flows into Utah Lake does evaporate. Now that evaporation reduces pollution in the lake. It's a source of local water vapor that changes the climate in a positive way. but there still are those who are talking about reducing the size of the lake rather than conserving. And then there have been a couple of recommendations that have come out of these discussions, though there's not total consensus, but a recognition that there's a need to increase coordination of post-fire management. So in 2008, there was a large mega fire that impacted the Utah Lake watershed. And cities, county, individual farmers, the water master have been struggling with the impacts of that wildfire. There's a desire to increase coordination in watershed restoration. And then a recognition that we also, on the research and management side for Utah Lake and the broader Great Salt Lake watershed, we don't want to be in competition with each other. So there can be unhelpful fights for water and other resources. And that's something that we don't want to be doing, right? We want to be managing the Utah Lake watershed as a part of this broader system. So I think that's all I've got to report.
Great presentation. Thanks, Ben. Any quick questions for Ben? Okay, thanks again. That was great. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all the liaisons for being here and engaging. Really appreciate it. Okay, we're fortunate today to have the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. I think he's here. Yeah. Great Salt Lake Commissioner Brian Steed with us today. Anybody who's tried to contact Brian knows his time is at a premium. But we really appreciate him being here and all the great work that he's doing. So we have a standing agenda item to hear a little update from the Commissioner's office. One of the statutory responsibilities of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council is to advise the governor, the legislature, and the commissioner on issues related to Great Salt Lake. So with that, Brian? Okay, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. So with that, I want to jump a little bit, shuffle the agenda just a little bit. I want to go to Leland Myers. One of the things the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council does is take $125,000 up to $125,000 per year out of the brine shrimp royalty, use it to fund studies and reports and things that help communicate about the lake, close the gap funding and things like that. Leland wants to talk about potential. Leland pointed out, and I think it's important to realize, we have to spend the money before the end of the fiscal year, which is July 1st. And so we really need to be making decisions now to make sure that we can have the money obligated and spent by that deadline. So Leland, you've got a potential project you want to talk about, and then I've got one I'll mention as well.
This is a project that I spoke about at the last meeting that is a continuation of our toolbox that we prepared for conservation. The intent of the project is to take that toolbox and then present it to the municipal and even the county communities across the Wasatch Front to help them understand why it's important for them to implement the tools that are included in the toolbox. We would focus it on those who are surrounding the lake first, and then those who are further off the front. The conservation toolbox includes ordinances and approaches to how conservation can be accomplished at the municipal level. Our studies in the past have indicated that we need significant conservation in order to maintain our low but adequate levels in the lake. That doesn't get us back to some new higher level, the 4198 that people talk about. That just keeps us from going worse. And so this kind of major conservation is needed. I don't think a lot of municipalities yet understand how to accomplish that, and the challenge that it faces to tell people, well, we're going to have to find a way to remove some turf and be more conserving in our approach to water. So what we want to do is award a contract or go out for proposals on a contract. Initially, we were trying to just do it as an amendment to the contract that prepared the toolbox, but we, through the procurement folks, have determined that we have to go out for a request for proposals. So we want to do that in the very near future. We want to get approval today from the council to proceed on that action. I estimate that the cost of the contract would be in the range of $45,000 to $55,000. And that would allow us to get to 30 plus communities and provide them with documents and files and everything else that is necessary and make presentations at those communities. Are there any questions?
Questions from Leland, from liaisons or council members? Anne?
Gina, I think you said at an earlier meeting when we were discussing this originally that this was something that you felt that was going to be welcome in some communities. Okay, just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, it's really extensive. I will say that like the workshops and things that are done might be a little bit onerous for planning departments to try to participate in that, but the materials are incredibly valuable. I mean, it's a starting point to engage, in my opinion, engage folks. And I think we talked about opportunities to share it. We unfortunately missed the deadline for the Utah League of Cities and Towns conference last fall, but we have all kinds of opportunities opening up at the first part of the year to share that information widely. Yeah, with the practitioners. And Tom, I don't know if you want to say anything about it, the practitioners that are best suited to implement those steps in their communities.
Thanks, Dina, for the invitation. I think it's really important. I think one element that maybe those here may know better. One observation I have, and I was just talking with Marcel Shoup a little bit about this, is at the municipal level, there's so many different repositories of resources that it seems a consolidation of, send them to one spot. And I'm not as informed as I would like to know on what's out there and whether that's something new fills a void or a collaboration and pulling things together is a better one. So I would offer that as maybe something to think about and incorporate into this, whether it's the effort is more of a consolidation of what's out there and making a landing spot so we don't have 10 different resources and so everyone's kind of pursuing their own thing.
If I could just comment about that, I think one of the important components of the work that Leland's talking about, it's not just a repository of information that practitioners can go to. It has some really practical steps for implementation. And I think those resources are a little bit harder to find. I also think it's tailored specifically for the issues we deal with on the Wasatch Front and in Utah. So I do think it would probably rise to the top if it was part of a repository. It should be part of that kind of thing. Like it should be in the library at Utah APA and other places and accessible. But what I appreciated once I read through all of the documentation, it's not just kind of, here's the information planner, think about it and figure out what to do. It's here's the information planner and here are some techniques and some recommendations about how to implement in a way that outreaches to the community and gets the really critical buy-in that I think folks that are in the planning world really need. Also, everybody's got to have a water component to their general plan. So, that's going to be another resource that I think they'll find really useful straight away.
I think a piece that adds into that, and I think that's embedded in, would be whether it's the state agencies or League of Cities and Towns or this body, that we help direct them to the one resource. So and I don't mean that other ideas aren't good, but so they know that things have been vetted through from the state agencies that are involved, from the planning level, because I think there's still plenty of landscape to get lost in. I'll say it that way.
So it sounds like there's general support for the idea. Any other questions or thoughts on this? Yeah, Candace. Candace is our Director of Water Resources. Great to have you here, Candace.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me add to the conversation. I just wanted to make a couple of notes. I think getting information out there is a challenge that we all have. And I think, we'd welcome support from additional sources of information, including the Great Lake Advisory Council. I would add that there are a lot of efforts on this front. I mean, you have Utah Waterways that's doing a lot of what Tom was talking about, of trying to figure out a way to consolidate information and to provide information that way. My staff is working on integrating land use and water planning, and working on getting that information out there. And there was also a recently completed, not yet published, water values study that Utah Waterways and the Division of Water Resources and others in this audience who participated in, looking at how Utah's value water. So there is a lot of effort in this space, and we'd be happy to come and talk to the council in addition to this thought of adding more information out there.
Candace, so just to be clear, do you see this as additive and supportive if it can be coordinated? That's kind of the general sense I'm getting from your comments. So it's just, let's make sure that this fits with all the other pieces that are out there as well. And if so, then it's welcome.
Yeah, I think that was well said.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Yeah, Tom.
I think one element, this is a question to both the board here and the larger body. Where are we at in terms of communications? You know, in the private sector, you have communication plans. At the city level, we have communication plans. And I'm curious, there's tremendous resources, there's tremendous brain trust and effort and expenditure of funds at all levels, private and public. Are we communicating well to the public so that they're finding what they need? And I'm not saying that it isn't happening, but I think it's an area of focus that I haven't heard anyone say a communications plan specifically. And maybe at the agencies it's embedded in. I'm not asking for a response, just something to think about for future efforts.
Thanks, Tom. Sure, it's something we could always do better on. Okay, Leland, do you want to make a motion?
I would
on
make
that?
a motion that we authorize the division to go out for procurement on this work, to develop the scope of work for it. I would add that probably the first task in the scope of work will be to reach out to all the other organizations that Candace mentions to make sure that the messages are cohesive before we go out to the communities. But that would be task 0 or 1. I don't remember. If it's this side, it's 0. If it's Utah Lakeside, it's 0. If it's Bear Riverside, it's task 1. So that would be my motion. And the approximate dollar value would be about $50,000.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, that motion's been seconded. Any discussion to the motion from members of the council? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and place it. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? I'll rule that motion carries unanimously. Okay, I think if I'm remembering right, I might put Marissa a little bit on the spot. Marissa, didn't we obligate like 25 already for something that was cleanup from last year? That was my recollection. I am putting it on the spot. Okay, it was the mineral extraction study. Okay, so we did, I think we already approved some funding from that. 25. So roughly we're 50, 25, about 75. So Marcel Shoup, I think Marcel, it's okay to out you. No, Marcel had an idea, and I think that is she suggested an idea to me that I think has some merit, and it's an update to the economic study potentially. So Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, one of the first big things it did was an economic study on the value of Great Salt Lake, which is just sort of was helping tell the message that it actually isn't just a bunch of wasted water. And that study had a lot of impact. And then more recently, we're like, well, that's an old study, right? I mean, things have changed, economics have changed. And so we did an updated one, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I think, an updated economic study. But the thought here is that potentially there's quite a bit of value in taking another look at economics, not necessarily going back and looking at all the economics of the brine shrimp industry or the mineral extraction industry, where probably just some inflation adjustment or something might roughly cover the value of those enterprises. But I think the part that neither the first or second study really got into into too much detail, is the catastrophic economic impacts that would ensue if Great Salt Lake went the way of an Owens Lake or an Urmia. I mean, because then we're not talking just, we're talking massive numbers. And I think it's, it's impossible to predict exactly what that is, but it is very, very reasonable to look at what's happened in other places and give an order of magnitude type, come up with an order of magnitude type estimate for people that helps bring that home. So that's the thought. I don't know. Marcel, is there anything you'd add to that? Not to totally put you on the spot.
But that's my life. Put me on the spot. No, I would just add that I think for the Great Salt Lake Integrated Basin Plan, there is a study, and Candace can correct me if I'm wrong, that Dr. Perry is doing, looking at dust control measures and how much those may cost. But, there are new findings or new, at least it sounds like they're looking at more issues on health concerns about dust. And I think the report that was most recently done, didn't have a lot of numbers on those things. And then also there was the look at property values, impacts to local revenues, those kinds of things. It may still be hard to actually calculate some of those things, but it might be possible to do more than what we did before. And so even just a first blush of what's possible could be really helpful, and then taking it to the next step. And Candace, I don't know when Dr. Perry's study is supposed to be done, but she left? Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway. Oh, Laura, you're back there. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. So if we have that, could feed in. Sorry. Is that helpful?
Thanks, Marcel. The question for the council liaisons, any thoughts on this? Is this the direction we want to go? I will say that, as Leland pointed out, we have to be making some decisions just given the clock. And last year we actually had one that we weren't able to obligate the money in time, and it lapses back. So it's use it or lose it type funding. So for the council liaisons, what's your interest and appetite in something like this? Any thoughts?
I don't think that 75,000 is going to be enough to do it. The Bear River one that I presented on, it was over 150,000, it seemed like. And so the other side to the coin that needs to be considered if you're going to do an economic study is the cost associated to society if you do take the remedial measures. So there's two sides to the coin that we need to make sure we release at the same time if we want to be nonpartisan. So I don't think that 75,000 is enough to get the job done.
You think sure? Maybe enough to get it started, to get the ball rolling, but yeah, Ben.
Sorry, if the study is contingent on Dr. Perry's results, this money would need to be used by July 1st as well, and I don't think his
It's not going to be ready in time.
finished. So
Okay.
it may be something that maybe we should look at for the following year if we need to get that information.
Okay. Sounds like this one maybe isn't right, but directionally, I think it's welcome if people have thoughts about doing it again, sort of a refined one. Anne, did you have something?
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's the right direction.
Okay. And then let me just say more. Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
I was just going to add that the original economic study only cost us $25,000 because what we were doing is very specific ground rules on what we were looking at. If we define the ground rule as to, and that's the scope of work, specifically to the area, for instance, of air quality, and if you combine it with what's already been done, I think you could get quite a bit done for $50,000. Because what we're doing is looking at the potential, and we're using other locations to actually come up with an estimate for it. We're not doing all of that in our own area, but we're looking at what others have done, and we're trying to factor that in. So I do believe that it's a good study. I think it's worthwhile to put that out there, that there are a compounding interest. It's not just the amount of work necessary to try and alleviate the dust if you don't have a lake, but it's also the health impacts that occur. And I think those are able to be factored in a high level estimate. So I do think you could do quite a bit for $50,000 with a good economic team.
So,
Sorry, I would just add that, and Laura can correct me, but I think the one that was done in, I guess it was 2019 when we did that, it was 70, 80,000, somewhere in there. It wasn't over 100, but maybe economists have raised their rates too.
inflation. The price gets higher as you move upstream.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yeah,
ask a
Dina.
question? And I'm going to ask what is probably going to be a really stupid question, and I'm going to be stepping in it, so just bear with me. Is there a way to maybe use a portion of those funds to establish a scope that might be an expanded scope? Because as Leland just said, there's other studies being done. Part of that scope may be a compilation of the research that's already been done to determine what could be emphasized. And then I am wondering, do the watersheds, do they have budgets
The
at all?
councils?
Yes, the
No.
watershed councils. Because I just am going to throw this out here as a possibility of, is there baseline data that would actually support the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council's goals that we can help to produce at the watershed council level? Are there unknowns there that if we knew them more specifically would actually benefit the larger system we're trying to support?
Well,
And would it be appropriate for the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council to participate in some of that, or utilize some of the funds we have available to leverage support for the other watershed councils to do some of the research that they might need necessary to help understand the relationship between the two?
I think that's appropriate, Dina. I see it as a separate issue than the one we're just on. It's not 125K is not a lot.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
not a whole lot we can do. And historically, what it's done is close the gap funding, and different things like that. We have funded, soup to nuts, our own studies.
Sure.
But that's sort of, I think that's worthy of consideration. What that looks like, I think, is sort of a big bite to sort of think about that.
And maybe we could maybe we take that and put a pin in it, have a conversation next year.
Mhm.
I just think that this whole establishment of the watershed councils is so critical to understanding the relationship between, and if they don't have budgets of their own, how are they going to accomplish what they need to accomplish that's actually at the end of the day going to support what we're trying to do at this table, right? So I just throw that out there as an idea, and maybe it's not ripe for that discussion at this point, but I'd love to revisit it at a later date. And I'm wondering if the money we do have available, that we have this critical deadline for expenditure, could be used to begin to compile even the abstracts from those other studies that are being done in a way that could begin to develop a scope that might be appropriate for consideration of funding in the next round of funding availability.
Okay, Warren, Warren, do I see your hand raised? Warren, you start talking about watershed councils, Warren's going to raise his hand. No.
Well, I thank you, Tim. I had my hand raised even before the discussion began on watershed councils, but I was applauding as well. So,
Warren, anything you'd say to what Dina was just talking about just funding for watershed councils, which I know is something that you've been giving some thought to, sort of big picture?
Well, it is. And it seems like the watershed councils are an opportunity to utilize that group, those respective groups of stakeholders, without having to go out and build some kind of group that the planning process could then proceed with. They're coming in ready-made. So having that integrated with this sort of a study, I think, is a great idea. And also to just looking at this idea, first of all, I'd like to say, let's see how far $75,000 can take all of us. As I've heard you say, Tim, us writ large. The scope of work is, I would hope, would include kind of a gap analysis on what else do we need to know that we don't know. And that's going to require some high degree of coordination between work being done by Laura Vernon's group, by the commissioner, and so on. So I hope that any study like this would take us toward more integrated
planning for Great Salt Lake so that we know how to pick up all the pieces of different things different groups are doing toward managing the lake. And included in that, I'm sorry that I'm being rather general about this, but the other thing that we don't really have a good handle on, I think, is the trade-offs of what different intervention measures on behalf of the lake would trigger. So what is it going to cost us to put water in the lake? And how do we, what kind of offsets are we making, and what are the cost of them? It seems to me would be part of an economic study. As I listen to this discussion and others, we all seem to be wrestling with how do we get this thing down to a manageable size, and how do we segment it so that the segments are meaningful and build towards something better. So I think this study is critical, but let's have a look at the scope of work and see if it's advancing, make sure it's properly coordinated, and maybe developing synergies with other work.
Thanks, Warren. Heidi's raised her hand. We're going to need to move off this topic because we're lagging and we need to move the agenda. But Heidi, let's catch your comment, and then we need to move on. Heidi, you got to unmute there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I don't know why it was off, but anyway, I'll keep this brief. I applaud the discussion that's happened thus far, and just want to highlight the point that we all know that this is a timely effort, and I'd really hate to see funding hold it back, and so the idea of phasing it is something that's very feasible as far as it sounds. So if you can proceed, the sooner the better, because it'll inform so many of our efforts. Thanks, that's all.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm actually hearing a couple of different ideas sort of in this. So one is what we were talking about, which is kind of maybe something that's narrowly focused and that's on dust and what are the impacts, and if you screw it up, how bad does it look, right? And there is a sort of in that would be an initial step might be scoping for that, right? Which is the discussion that we had. What I'm hearing a little bit separate from so I don't think we have time to keep chatting about. Leland, do you have a motion, or do you have a thought there? Okay, it looks like Leland's got a motion. So
I would make the motion that we develop a scope of work, that we invite everyone to come to a meeting to develop that scope of work, and we include other parties, not just us. I would be willing to volunteer to work with that so that we can get that scope of work put together, invite anyone else who wants to be there. We'll draw the best scope of work involved with both ideas, or we'll narrow it depending upon what we feel we can work on. And we'll put that out for proposals. By the next meeting, we'll have those proposals back, and we can act on it as to whether or not that's something we really want to proceed with. But I would guess that if we don't proceed with this, we're not going to have time to proceed with anything else before the end of the year, the budget year.
Okay, well stated. So everybody understand Leland's motion? I'll go ahead and second that motion. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and place it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. I don't know, should we do show of hands right now? Should we say contact you or Ben? Okay, so. Okay. Coalition of the Willing. Okay, so let it be written. So let it be done. Great Salt Lake Commissioner, you still here? Brian. Thanks for being here, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Really sorry about the technical issues before. My name is Brian Steed. I'm the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. I also work at Utah State University, where I run an institute there called the Janet Community Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air. First of all, I wanted to say thanks for having me. I know that Tim often takes this spot, Tim Davis, my deputy. This has led to people like Warren calling me the ghost of the Great Salt Lake. But I would like to note, I am here in person, whereas Warren is not. So then I showed up and Trevor was in a suit and a tie, and then I felt really guilty, but that's neither here nor there. Great Salt Lake water levels today, it's been a wild ride. And you'll see the equalization of the north arm and the south arm. We've kept the berm open, and you see really getting close to where they're very, very similar levels within 0.3 feet. And that's something that's been interesting to watch. Going forward, what I've been asked to talk about today is kind of what we've been doing for the last little bit, as well as where we're going in the future. Just want to talk about one thing generally. The last month has been pretty interesting personally for me because I spent time working with other people around the nation on similar saline lake ecosystem problems. Presented it at a conference at UC Davis School of Law, dealing with kind of the legal challenges there, as well as we went out on a tour with the state, looking at Owens and Mono Lake ecosystems and the various challenges they've faced, as well as the policies they've responded to. As a result of those efforts, I can just tell you we have more similarities than we have differences with other saline lake ecosystems, and I think it's important for us to learn from them. And I think it's really important to note that all of these ecosystems have been viewed as less important, sometimes less desirable than other human uses. They're very dynamic systems, and that means that they have natural highs and natural lows, and those natural variations make it difficult from a human perspective to say, well, is this something different, or is this something that's just part of the natural process? That being said, good science across the board notes that falling water levels can result from human actions, and I think that we have seen that in our own Great Salt Lake as well. And those falling water levels can result in ecologic problems. Those ecologic problems inevitably result in human problems. So not only do we have human causes, we also have human consequences as a result of that. And lastly, but not leastly, we have diffuse management structures on all of those ecosystems. And I think that's important to start there because, well, honestly, we can learn from the mistakes. We can learn from the successes of other places. And that's where I'd like to start. I'd also like to note one of the things that we noted on our Owens and Mono Lake tour is that if this whole water resources thing doesn't work out for Candace Hassenjaeger, there is a restaurant in Lone Pine, California that happily take her back as a server. It was remarkable. They had really a struggle taking our orders. Candace stepped in and fixed everything. I think they offered you a job on the spot, right? So nice. Just to note on that, challenge has often been, or these systems often been viewed as secondary. This is a picture that I like to show from my own dissertation work where I studied California water systems over time. This is the Owens Lake being diverted, or the Owens River being diverted into California, and you'll see how happy they were. It was a great American day. Ultimately, many have come to lament that choice, and in a way that I think is really important for us to learn. Not to say, no judgment here. This was done at a time that people honestly needed the water, and they didn't know any better on the consequences. I can say this, similarly, we have a Union Pacific Causeway that I can tell you today would not have been built, given what we know today, but it has been built, and so we're going to deal with those consequences now, and in this case, it's been a bit of a happy accident because I think it's allowed us more management tools, and we can talk about that going forward. So in the next little bit, we are going to come out with a 2034 plan. My guess is it'll come out in the next month or so. This is a follow-on to our strategic plan that we presented to the governor and to the legislature per statute in November of last year. It was due to the governor. The governor reviewed it. Had to be reviewed and approved by the legislature by December, and so that made for a delightful Thanksgiving. We're on the same course to have another delightful Thanksgiving this year. So Tim and I are working on this plan going forward. Just want to point out the design principles that we have going forward are do no harm. We need to make sure that we're enforcing, measuring, and monitoring and building on our capacity. Got to realize we're all in this together. We got to focus on the major policy levers that we have, that we really have to iterate and adapt. So learn from where we are and learn as we go. And then lastly, we have to use the criteria from the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan. And I just point this out for you all because I can tell you straight, when I talk Great Salt Lake solutions, oftentimes there are many things that are put out there that would work. but for political problems, or but for economic problems, or but for ecologic problems. And we have to cross off all those boxes in order to really have something that is sustainable as a solution to the Great Salt Lake problems. What we're looking to do, first of all, we need to have a baseline water conservation dedicated and delivered to the lake. One of the things we're proposing as part of this is a 10% reduction in depletion from all water sources. That would give an additional 250,000 acre feet of water to the lake yearly. We're looking to get to that 10% number by 2030. The reason we chose 2034 in this case is because, well, two reasons. One, 2034 is 10 years after the start of the commissioner's office, and that really falls quite in line with where we are on our intermediate planning process. An additional 2034 will have the eyes of the world focused on this very valley, looking at how we're doing on managing our own world. And the Olympics will present us with a lens on how we're viewed and how we're doing. And I think that we can get ahead of this and have a good news story. In order to achieve that 10%, we really are going to have to be working with all types of water users, agriculture, municipal, industrial. We're looking specifically at Phragmites and other invasives, mineral extraction, and data centers and technology. And because Joe's here, I mean, honestly, Compass has shown a tremendous amount of leadership in this space and getting us ahead of a curve on actual real water deliveries to the lake. So thanks so much for working with us on that. We have to use adaptive management tools. We really have to maximize wet water years. We have to coordinate our actions with water storers, and that's with districts and canal companies. And on those wet water years, we really have to work to cover as much as the exposed playa as possible in those wet years. The reason being is we know there's going to be dry years that follow. It's a whole bunch easier to get water to the lake when people have a surplus of water. And so really maximizing on those years. And why we say cover as much exposed playa as possible is because there is preliminary data coming out from Kevin Perry and his group that rewetting the playa occasionally actually does a great job at reforming the crust. That crust can then prevent some of those dust problems. The work is preliminary. I will note that the work is preliminary, but that's pretty good news in terms of those dust concerns we have. And next, we really have to manage adaptively the Union Pacific Causeway berm, and we need to closely monitor salinity, because if we look at what the tipping points on the lake will be for endangered species and other things, it really is a salinity problem that we are most concerned about when it comes to those ecologic fears. And we've shown that we can have good adaptive management. We saw incredibly dangerously high levels in 2022. We brought those levels back down to a more healthy range, but that's done through some intentional actions on the state's part. And that's not me taking a victory lap. That's been people trying to figure out, while we are in a crisis, how we can do better. Our hope is to never get in that crisis again. Lastly, I just point out that there really is a need to act. If we look at the lessons from other saline lake ecosystems, this is a picture I took a couple weeks ago in Owens Lake. This right here, that's gravel. That's gravel that's been covered over much of the exposed playa. This is one of several tools that they've put into place. The cost of Owens Lake dust management yearly, $100 million a year. Yearly. Okay, that's for a lake 1/16th, 1/17th the size of Great Salt Lake. Now, that's a problem. And then if you look at the cost actually of putting all those remediation measures in, they're sitting at about $2.6 billion to date. That's real money, and that's something I think that we need to avoid. The other good news is this: actions can produce results. And again, this is not what we are aiming to be, clearly, but it shows that actually big water years in Owens have actually refilled part of the lake and mitigated some of the problems they see. In fact, because you're here, Tim, they even have brine shrimp back, which, you know, as a sea monkey lawyer, I think you can appreciate that. So I just think that there are things that we can do. That's part of the playa that you can see has re-wetted through this very large water years they had there. Different choices can make different outcomes. With that, I'll take any questions or discussions you might have. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. We're a little sliding on the agenda, so just one or two quick questions.
Yeah.
Arjun?
I'll just stay over here. Question for you about what the commission has plans and some of the things you brought up here. When Trevor was talking about what they did on their canal company, I mean, it was amazing. Through a combination of magic and plastic and concrete, they came up with 10,000 extra feet, right? Crazy. What are they going to do with that? Does that create an extra water right? Can the commission go for that water and say, hey, can you share it with us? Can the water trust buy it? I mean, and that's one canal company saving that money. What is the plan for the commission to deal with wonderful things like this that actually almost create water? I'd like to
I
be
think Trevor
interested.
has an answer for that. Where there's
That's
a view.
quick answer.
And I could say just really quick, I think we have to be very careful on what we do with that saved water. One of the things we were really looking to do when we do save water is dedicate and deliver that to the lake. If we don't do that, there's the real possibility of moving backwards on how much water we're using as society. And listen, I'm not ragging on society. I think that I'm happy to live here and I drink water on the daily. The problem is that we're going to have to make sure that we have enough water for people to do the important things that Trevor and his people do, and also get more water to the lake. And that's the balancing act we're figuring out. Trevor, sorry.
So because of the Bear Lake Settlement Agreement that I talked about in our presentation, every drop of our savings is actually going to the Great Salt Lake this year because that lake is being evacuated to create more flood water space. And anytime we're using Bear Lake storage water, that's where all the savings went. So that doesn't happen every year with Bear Lake Canal Company, and we made that really clear as we talked about things. But this year, that's where that water is going. Pacific Corp has already emptied most of it down the Bear.
One last question from Ben.
It'll be quick. That 10% number and the 250,000 acre feet goal is pretty low on your matrix as far as refill scenarios.
Sure.
Any thoughts on, is that an opening bid? How does that relate to plans in the future to conserve
So,
water?
I mean, I think that's where we're having that balancing act, honestly, of what's politically possible as well as economically possible, right? And that's what we're trying to figure out, how we can actually get the money to pay for people to make those conservation dollars. In truth, that does not get us back up to 4198 in 10 years. That gets us stabilized above 4195, which is good. It's better than where we are, but it's not certainly where we think we need to be.
Okay, with that, thanks, Brian. We really appreciate you being here. Great information, and thanks for the questions. And I'm sure we can follow up if needed. Thank you. So we have two substantive presentations that are on the agenda. First, Laura Vernon's going to talk about an update for the integrated plan. And then we're going to hear from Ryan Rowland and Dwight Slough on Great Basin monitoring and reporting enhancements. But Laura, you're up and ready to go, so take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So nice to be back and see your faces. I miss you guys often. But it's been a year since I've been here before talking about the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, if you can believe that. And so I appreciate this time. It also helps us fulfill the requirement that I do present to Great Salt Lake Advisory Council on this project. So again, thanks. Just a reminder about the project. This is a combined super project. In 2022, the legislature funded the Great Salt Lake Integrated Water Assessment Project. And then around the same time, the Bureau of Reclamation also provided the state of Utah funding for a Great Salt Lake Basin study. And so we combined those two projects into one super project that required a plan for the plan. So the plan was so big, and even in the bill, it says you need to do a plan for the plan. So we did that. We hired Jacobs and their esteemed colleagues to help us put together a work plan. We had several months of meetings, stakeholder involvement. We had a draft put out in November of 2023, and then a final in early 2024 after an open house and a stakeholder I guess, dialogue that some of you were participating in. So anyway, now we're putting the plan to work. We're implementing the plan. There's plenty of tasks for us to do that have been identified in the work plan. And just a reminder, for the goal of this project, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, is to ensure a resilient water supply for Great Salt Lake and for all water uses, including people and the environment in the watershed. To be clear, this isn't a plan solely for Great Salt Lake. This is a plan to help us understand and manage water better in the entire Great Salt Lake Basin. Great Salt Lake has the water it needs, and all of the water uses have the water that they need. So what this plan isn't, I don't know about you guys, but we here on the daily, there are so many plans that are going on Great Salt Lake. Who's doing what, and how is this plan different than that plan? And so our division put together a matrix that tries to illustrate this. And so you can see down the side, we have all of the plans that are currently in action. Commissioner Steed just alluded to the first one, the strategic plan, the Basin Integrated Plan, the Comprehensive Management Plan by Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, the Division of Water Rights, Distribution Management Plan, and then the Trust Watershed 5-year strategy. And so you can see just what the objectives of each of these plans are, what they do and what they do not. And so if you all are ever interested or asked about all of the plans that are going on, and reach out to me, I'd be happy to share this with you. I think it's a document or a visual that helps illustrate who's doing what. And I guess this is a better visual of how we're trying to look at who's doing what on the plan, on the lake in the basin. Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan is the plan to rule them all. I think that we've heard that phrase before. The Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan is looking within the basin. The Watershed Enhancement Trust looking at the water and the wetlands. The distribution plan from Water Rights is looking at lake water, and the CMP is looking at state lands. So I know there's a lot of talk and concern about there being too many plans out there. And I think if we all, those of you involved in the council, and we just all are familiar with what is happening and using similar language and how we talk about the plans being different and the different objectives, I think that would be really helpful. So back to the basin plan. This is a multi-year plan, as you may recall, coming with several different components, the largest ones being the planning and the modeling. And I'll talk about those in just a little bit. But we have planning, modeling, and the stakeholder engagement will be going throughout the entire process, and then the report writing and a final CMP and or a final management or integrated plan. Full disclosure with the process that's we're enduring right now, the Bureau of Reclamation, they've provided their $3.1 million to go towards the modeling part of this plan. And we are working through their solicitation process to get a modeler on board to help us do this project. And so before we can really dive into the nuts and bolts of all of the modeling of all of the basins and all of the resources, we need their support. And so we're working and are hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, we will have a procurement out there for the modeling. And then that will allow us to put out the RFP that the Division of Water Resources is interested in doing for the planning approach that will help us with the tasks that you see up at the top. I'll talk about in just a bit. So just a reminder of all of the players involved. You guys are central to this. As you can see, the commissioner is providing oversight throughout the whole project. We have, very importantly, members of the Great Salt Lake Basin Plan Steering Committee. Those are stakeholders in the basin that have helped guide the process so far. Industry groups, water districts, an array of folks who are invested in the watershed, and then the advisory group is the state and federal partners that we've been working with. And we've been meeting with these groups relatively frequently every month over the last year or so, putting the work plan to work. I think central and important to this will be, you guys mentioned the watershed councils earlier, Dina mentioned them. We'd like to use the watershed councils and the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council as kind of like, not jumping off points, but points of contact for how we engage people on particular issues within the basin. Like, what are the issues with water and salt balance in Great Salt Lake? We'll come to Tim and the advisory council, and we're hoping to host workshops specific to each basin or each resource. And so we would come to you guys, let you know about that. You could get the word out through your channels, even maybe it's after an advisory council meeting or something in the future. But Plenty more conversations to come on those. One of the things we've been busy doing is putting together all of these technical teams. So we have technical teams for each of the river basins, but also for the resources as well. And I will show you all of the Army that we have just on the technical teams alone. These are people who are experts in their field: Great Salt Lake, Bear, Weber, Jordan, Colorado River. On the demand side, municipal and industrial, Great Salt Lake. But Jake Sarago is the lead engineer working on this with the Division of Water Resources, and he's been trying to meet with these teams monthly. And what we're doing with them is trying to identify all of the missing pieces that each of the modeling teams are going to need to get beefed up once we hire the contractor. So for the Bear River, in order to get the Bear River model into the preferred riverware model, what is the missing pieces that need to be obtained to get that model to look similar to the Jordan River model? So lots of work to do identifying the tasks that need to be started in the next couple months when we get the contractor on board. And this is a diagram of all of the data that we're trying to pull together that's never been pulled together before. You see we have, for the river basins or the hydrology on the left-hand side, you have all these bits and pieces, and people have their data for the Bear and their data for the Weber, but everything isn't together in one central place, and we're hoping to put all of this data into one central database so we can better understand what the impacts to all of these resources would be if management changes happen. So just today, I'd like to focus on Great Salt Lake and the climate data, and just give you a brief update on those. So with the update on the Great Salt Lake hydrology, the model update for Great Salt Lake itself, many of you were around for the development of GSLIM. Holds a special place in many people's hearts. I think it was the advisory council that helped establish the Great Salt Lake integrated management model like 10 years ago. But the technical team, has suggested that maybe we need a more open source way to understand or to use the Great Salt Lake model. And so discussions are happening now. They'd like to replicate GoldSim. We still would maintain GoldSim with the Division of Water Resources, but we would use a more open source programming for the Great Salt Lake. And right now, the version that's winning the votes is Python, for all of you who are very knowledgeable about models. And it will do the same thing, address water balance in both wetland and lake, and salt balance. And then there'll be improvements to the GSLIM model as we're using this new updated Python model. So again, this is just like going back. This is just one little component down in the corner of this giant puzzle. And we've already encountered, some significant redos or edits that we need to work on. So anyway, more about modeling. I'm no climate modeler, most of you know that. And I cannot speak very well to all of this. If you are interested in learning more about the details about the hydrology modeling, the climate, or the economic modeling that I'll talk about in a second, please let me know, and I'd be happy to have someone come in and dive into some of these details. But one of the important pieces that we've started is with the University of Utah, with Court Strong, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's Technical Services Committee. We've started working on the climate modeling, and the dynamical downscaling that's happening is where Court is taking global climate models and putting them down into a regional digestible way to help understand how changes in climate could impact changes in stream flow and snowpack and all of that. So one of the things they're doing is trying to identify what are the possible cases, or what could future climates look like. And in September, we You may have noticed we sent out a survey asking people what their thoughts were on how the timing or how they have modified or thought about climate in their current operations. And so we had 47 respondents for that survey, sending it out to about 300 people. But we were really focused on water managers and the people who are day in and day out dealing with moving water and understanding water in a large system. And so the climate cases that Court and his team are interested in exploring more or having when we're doing our development of an analysis of management strategies is the hotter and drier, and somewhat warmer and somewhat wetter. So those are the scenarios or the cases that are going to be applied to the scenarios that the management scenarios that we will be producing down the road. And then another component of climate modeling is VIC modeling. The Division of Water Resources created a VIC model that is helping us to understand how changes in climate will impact runoff and stormwater, groundwater. And so the Bureau of Reclamation is like ground truthing that right now. They're checking the model, calibrating it, make sure it makes sense for to use moving forward when we select all the alternatives. So one bit of important information, and I think this gets back to what you guys were just talking about earlier, is that we're going to be doing an economic impact analysis as well for this plan. And this wasn't something that I think, originally had talked about in the scope of work for this project, but this could get at some of the very things that Dina and Marcel were talking about. But the Technical Services Committee with the Bureau, or Technical Services Group with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has economists on board, and they will help us study what the economic impacts are of changes in management strategies. So if there is a 10% reduction across the board in ag and M&I water, what is the economic impact of that? And so we can, or what if we cut golf courses out of the basin? What would the economic impact be of that? So I think this is a really important piece of the project that we're going to be working on. Usually the Bureau is concerned because usually they're pulled in at the very last minute to do these kind of analyses, but they're hopeful and excited because of this time. We're working with them on the front end to help identify what some of the issues are. I believe they participated in a steering committee meeting and an advisory group meeting a while ago, trying to begin to identify what the issues are, both in the lake and then up in the basin. And so I think this is a great opportunity for the advisory council to engage in this project, is through understanding what the economic impacts of different changes in management strategies would be. Okay, almost done. So in the beginning, I showed you all of the steps of the planning process. These are the steps that we're going to be going through with the planning contractor. And these are also all the opportunities that I see with each of these steps that the advisory council can be involved in the process. And so really, I think the key components are helping us know what these future conditions could be, what they would look like in the basin, and then evaluating those alternatives, understanding what the trade-offs of those alternatives would be, who are the winners, who are the losers in some of those cases, and then in the end, what does acceptable winning and losing look like, and then help us develop an actionable plan, making recommendations for the basin in kind of like how Brian was talking about, in times of wet years, what are some actions we can do? In times of dry years, what are some of the things we can do, because we better understand what the trade-offs are. Okay, this is my last slide. And it's kind of my favorite because I feel like you could take all day on it. But we talked about, you guys mentioned earlier, a gap analysis about all of the projects that need to be done in the basin to help better understand water management strategies. Well, we did a gap analysis during the work plan, and we came up with, I think it was 125 projects, and then through a selection process, whittled it down to these 8 projects. And The ones that you guys were talking about, the options and costs for dust control, also the M&I and ag optimization projects, those are all being incorporated into the commissioner's strategic plan. I think they have a due date of some deliverables by tomorrow, actually. But anyway, we've been working closely with the commissioner's office to help get them some data that they need, but we could spend a day on each of these projects, and I think they're all critical to understanding Great Salt Lake a little better. And so if you want, like for that dust control project, let's get Kevin Perry and his team in here to talk about that. For the M&I project, let's get folks in here to, if you guys are interested in learning any more about some of these projects now, how they may influence your future funding or what you want to fund. I think the timing for these is super important. Like, I would not want you guys to put your money into projects that are already being studied here. For example, that health costs, we're asking them to look at the options and costs for dust control. And we're working with the University of Utah epidemiologists to do that. So anyway, that was really fast. I felt like I should get you all caught up. Any questions?
Hey, Laura, in the interest of time, I think we're going to ask folks to contact you later with questions.
Totally fine.
But I got a very big take home, which is our little working group needs to be sure to interface with you and see if there's a niche, something that would advance the ball that's not just treading the exact same ground. So I think that's so important in all of these efforts.
There's so many things happening. It's really exciting. And yeah, just happy to chat about them all.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. Okay, Ryan, Dwight, you guys here? Neither. So who's pinch hitting? Thanks to our pinch hitter for pinch hitting.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. David O'Leary. I'm the director of the USGS Utah Water Science Center. Ryan sends his regards. He's at a national monitoring conference. He didn't know he was going to be attending here. Fire this up. Tells me I'm sharing here, but I'm not seeing it there. All right. All right. Let me go back in.
And do entire screen.
Oh, thank you.
Click here.
Sure. Thank you.
Yep. And then once you go to PowerPoint, you can do.
Let me just ask, while we're getting this teed up, if for those that have given presentations today, if you could maybe, I don't know, forward those to Ben Stearman, or there's been some requests to see copies of those. So if you're willing to share those presentations, if you could sort of send them, we can blast them out to everybody. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
David.
I'll move through this pretty quick and I can answer any questions afterwards. I'm going to talk briefly about current conditions on Great Salt Lake. And then the main thrust of this is to talk about some of the new work we're doing in collaboration with Bureau of Reclamation in the Great Salt Lake Basin. And then I'll highlight some of what we've already got started here. So this is Commissioner Steed presented this, but just run through it real quick. We're looking at, this is the south arm. We're looking at a daily value of 4192.2. We're down from our high of 4195.2. So the math, yeah, about 3.1 feet down since our seasonal high in May. So that's on the south arm. North arm, is Commissioner Steed also alluded to, right? The two arms are starting to equalize. Today we're at 4191.5. And I just want to remind folks too, we are publishing real-time flow through the breach, right? So we have a site out there at the breach. You can go look at flow through the breach, and that's showing what's moving right now from the south to the north arm. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the work we're doing here in a second. I was just going to run through the surface water inflows to the lake, kind of where we stand in the year. So this is the Bear River cumulative flow. This is in millions of acre feet, I think. yeah, millions of acre feet. So we're just above the mean, right? It's nice to be in the green there, especially given what we saw maybe 3-4 years ago. Here's the Weber River, 0.387, run through these real quick. And then coming in from the south, Goggin Drain, 0.342. Looks like a lot of water maybe coming out of reservoirs and other things coming into the lake this year. And then also this is Farmington Bay outflow. So you add all those up. Water year 2024, so these are major surface water inflows to Great Salt Lake. We're looking at about 2.11 million acre feet. Compare that to water year 2023, 2.32, which was also a great year. So we're looking pretty good on inflows. You know, things are at or above average as we're looking at surface water inflows to the lake. Okay, shifting gears, I want to talk about some of the work that we're undertaking, and this is in cooperation and collaboration with funding through the Bureau of Reclamation. And so I'll just run through, we've divvied this work up into several tasks, and I'll talk about each one in a little more detail. So as part of this work, we're looking to install additional streamflow gauges in the Great Salt Lake Basin, do some what we're calling pilot scale stream gauging efforts at Bear River Bay. So the monitoring at Bear River Bay is extraordinarily complex. It's very difficult to do, but it's also the major surface water input to Great Salt Lake. So it's important that we try to get as close as we can on those. Talk about some other stream gauges in the Weber Basin that are in support of other Bureau of Reclamation operations. Updates to the Great Salt Lake Hydromapper, which is the addition of this interactive lake surface area and volume calculator. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some work on the water balance for the lake, salt mass for the lake, and then get back to this Bear River outflow modeling, and then this buoy profiles to get at evaporation. So those are the 8 tasks that are part of the work we have proposed with Bureau of Reclamation, and I'll dive into each one. The first one is stream gauging. So we're moving ahead pretty quickly on this. We've got new gauges going in, a lot of field reconnaissance. We want to evaluate the right location for these gauges. And so you can see kind of our monitoring network on the east shores and more of Great Salt Lake, and showing which gauges have been installed. We are in meetings with DWR and Water Resources looking at gauge locations. I think we have 3 more to place. I do want to highlight that Rio Tinto has funded this Lee Creek gauge on the south side, and so that freed up funding for an additional gauge. So big thanks to Rio Tinto for putting that in. So we're also looking where we'll put that. We can shift the funds to another new gauge. Installations, I should say, have begun, and many of these you can actually start accessing the data on our real-time website. Remind folks with the gauge, we have to get a stage discharge relationship, which takes some time to develop. So some of them may only be reporting stage while our techs are out there measuring the flows, so we can establish some kind of relationship between the stage of the river or creek and the flow past it. So that's that last bullet point there. This just shows all of them. I've got check marks where the gauges are installed. We still have, as I noted, 3 additional gauges to find the locations. And with the Rio Tinto gauge, we're looking at 14 new gauge locations going in to try to monitor flows to Great Salt Lake. So a real enhancement through this project in terms of looking at inflows, quantifying inflows, surface water inflows to Great Salt Lake, which then will help improve models and monitoring and projections. Here's some of the guys and gals who get to do the fun work at USGS, getting these gauges in at a couple of these locations. Okay, the next task is this Bear River Bay outflow. As I said, Bear River Bay is extraordinarily complex, trying to monitor the inflows from Bear River Bay to Great Salt Lake. And so we're kind of throwing the kitchen sink at this one. We're looking to develop these water velocity stage and field measurement discharge at both the Bear River Bay outflow bridge there, as well as the Minerals Core Bridge, which is the north one, and then the Railroad Bridge to the south. We're going to try either index velocity, which is a well-established method, or this new probability concept method to evaluate flows. This data will be used to feed a Utah State University numerical model that I'll mention here in a minute. And then a lot of this work leverages ongoing work with the Division of Water Resources, where we are already going out 16 to 20 field measurements of discharge at these locations per year. So we do have our new high-vis camera up at the bridge, so that's exciting. You can go out there and look and see. Part of this is this idea that the tech may not have to visit the site, so they can try to ground truth what they're seeing. The instruments are telling them. So we got near real-time imagery, water surface velocity, field measurements of discharge. We are going to be installing a side-looking ADCP meter. So that's been ordered to go in at the bridge. We do have a permit. We're working on the Pacific Core Bridge, but the Mineral Core Bridge, we're working through permits to get our gear out there. And eventually we want to have near real-time stage, water surface velocity, water column velocity, and field measurements. And again, this is a really complicated site. If you're just looking at surface velocity, the wind can really drive the movement of the water a lot different than what's moving through the water column as a whole. And this just shows some of the complexities here. This is I won't delve into this too much, but we're comparing the surface water velocity compared to the stage at the site. There's some loose correlation, but not direct. Okay, so this will feed into another part of the agreement with Bureau of Reclamation, and this is work that Dr. Sam Dutta at Utah State University is going to be doing, and this is basically building a model for this Bear River discharge area at the two bridges. And so his deliverables include a computer model and then a report describing how they developed the model. And so I should say that all of the monitoring that we're doing will be in direct support or in support of this model. Moving on to the next task, hopefully you're all familiar with the Great Salt Lake Hydromapper. We have this clearinghouse of monitoring data, everything for the lake. One of the smaller components of this is we're looking to enhance the Hydromapper. We did put out a new topo bathymetric elevation model for Great Salt Lake here. And what we want to do is incorporate this into the Hydromapper. We're envisioning some kind of slider bars where people can say, okay, at a given stage, what is the coverage of the lake? What is the volume, to try to tie those together so that other researchers and folks working in this space can easily and intuitively access this data. And then moving on to the next thing. So we have the water and salt balance for Great Salt Lake. The last real definitive report was by a gentleman named Brian Loving in 2000. And we're looking to revisit this report. So how is the water moving in and out of the lake? How are the salt balances moving in and out of the lake? We have folks on our staff who are making, I don't want to call them back of the napkin calculations, but a lot of it's in response to committees asking, and they work through it. We're looking to really formalize this, set up scripts so we can extract the data and move through these things quickly. So this is a fairly major component of this work that we'll be working on over the next year to look at water balance, salt balance, those types of things. And then finally, the state of Utah runs a very well-established complex evaporation network. We're looking to feed into that. Part of this is to collect temperature profiles from Great Salt Lake. This will be deploying 2 buoys that'll be doing a real-time temperature at the lake. We have the equipment ordered. It just got into our office, and so we're going to start coordinating with DNR to try to determine the best locations to get these buoys out there. And I think the hope is to have, again, everything USGS does publicly available, real-time data out there for others to use. And so, yeah, I'm a sorry substitute for Ryan. He sends his regards, and hopefully we both can be at the next meeting. And I think we'll do questions afterwards to keep moving.
Yeah, thanks, David. Great presentation. You please catch up with David if you've got questions for him. I'm sure he'll stick around for a few minutes. Historically, we've always given time for public comment at this meeting, and I know we're running a little bit late today, but there's time for brief public comment if anybody has it. So, Ben.
Thanks, Tim. I just want to take the opportunity to let everybody know that we're in the midst of our update to our comprehensive management plan for Great Salt Lake. Sorry for the barrage of emails you've already seen, and thanks if you've been to a meeting or filled out the survey. We've received several hundred responses on our survey, and we're thirsty for more. So we're going to do one more public meeting on the 20th. I'll add a link to this meeting here, but if you are interested in attending or sharing this through your platforms and getting more feedback, we would love to hear from you. That was all.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Anybody else? Marissa.
Real quick, I'm going to spare further details on the Great Salt Lake Sentinel landscape for hopefully a future presentation. Many of you in this room are already partners of the Sentinel landscape. You're already listed on our committees and groups. But if you don't know what the Sentinel landscape is and you're curious to get involved, please come talk to me. Additionally, if you haven't finalized your partner subcommittee groups, please do so by the end of the week.
Thanks, Marissa. Any more? Okay, it's testimony meeting.
Last week, I had the pleasure of being in Antalya, Turkey, to present at the 15th International Conference on Salt Lake Research. And it was an amazing experience. And I was joined by a cohort of Great Salt Lake talent and commitment. Overall takeaway is the fact that we're doing an amazing job on behalf of our saline system. That doesn't mean that we should be lazy and use that, to rest on. But I was very proud and people were very impressed. So I want to thank you all for your collective commitment and awareness building and just being a part of the network to work to preserve and protect the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. No exaggeration to say the eyes of the world are on Utah to see how well we handle this problem. So thanks for that reminder, Lynn. I've certainly seen that in my travels as well. Okay, thanks everyone. We're going to close the public comment. I'll just make a reminder for members of the committee, liaisons, and members of the public. If you have ideas for topics to cover at these meetings, please reach out to me or Ben. They're in the process of hiring a replacement for Marissa, who was awesome in that role. I think that person's accepted, Ben. All right, so we'll start on Monday. So we're excited to meet a new face to help us with GSLAC, and I'm working on a lot of these issues. So again, if you have topic ideas, please let us know. A reminder, next meeting is January 8th, same bat time, same bat channel. And generally we stick to a second Wednesday of the month, 10 a.m. type schedule. So you can see every other month is kind of the schedule that we'll have for all next year. Okay. With that, can I get from a member of the council motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Dina, second. Second. Joe, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, members of the committee, liaisons, members of the public for being here today. We are adjourned.